Last night, President Joe Biden addressed the nation from his Oval Office in a farewell address that was riddled with questionable claims and outright falsehoods. Here to fact check the outgoing president for us is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Chris Bedford. He's Blaze senior politics editor. And Chris, let's just dive into it. We saw so many of these outrageous moments from Joe Biden. What was the one that stood out the most to you?
I think it was largely the presentation. I mean, I was a bartender for over 10 years. I managed a bar for a long time. I don't think he was drunk, but if somebody at my bar was slurring like that, I would get them a cab and I would talk to the bartender about over-serving someone. It's amazing how he got over the finish line. I had to rewind multiple times to understand the words that were coming out of his mouth. And what did come out of his mouth, and I'm actually kind of thankful for this, was probably the last time in history that I will be forced to listen to that fake historian John Meacham's completely vapid emo prose about the darkness in America and the threat of the GOP. I don't know how John Meacham was long a famous presidential and American historian who's become a complete and total partisan hack, had a complete and total brain meltdown under Donald Trump, and has been writing some of the Statue of Liberty references we saw last night. Has been writing a lot of Joe Biden's speeches. And what it's really exposed is this last complete and total sycophant who really thinks that Biden's the next Lincoln, the next FDR, is someone who very sadly actually has just such a surface level grasp of what American history is. It's kind of, he's like the Thomas Kincaid of historians, just painting pretty pictures that don't have actually a lot of depth to them. And also a takeaway from the speech is how desperate he is to be remembered. You know, John F. Kennedy had the Peace Corps, for better or for worse. He tried to start the Climate Corps. FDR had the New Deal, so he did the Green New Deal. And then in last night's speech, he tried to mimic Eisenhower with the tech industrial complex. Now, I actually think there's a lot of problems with tech. I think tech is extremely dangerous. I think that there are oligarchs who have largely been unaccountable in America. But why did Joe Biden say this? It's because in the last few weeks, for the first time in history, tech refused the power and influence of the Democrats. It's so patently see-through. And as opposed to just one of his aides had such a striking line. He said, "I wish the old man had just waved goodbye." Instead of that, we were given this darkness. It wasn't a farewell speech. It was a go-to-hell speech. And it showed throughout the whole thing. Honestly, I'm just glad it's over.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We should really zero in on this thing about the oligarchs because, you know, it's part and parcel of what used to be the old Democrat Party rhetoric. Now there's this darkness in America that's supposed to be, ultra MAGA and the extreme right. But then there's also this warning of oligarchy, out of the blue all of a sudden. So let's take a listen to what Biden said about that.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. This is a dangerous and that's a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. The dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been the case for really at least a decade plus that most people who are paying attention know that most elites and billionaires have shoveled money into the coffers of one party in this country for a long time. Every wealthy bank, right? Everyone in finance, everyone in every industry has basically, except for like one or two, has funneled their money in the Democratic Party. So this is completely insane, right? Sort of rhetoric. Also, as everyone who's alive knows, there are large oligarchic and corporate interests in America that have a lot of power. So, Chris, riddle me this. You just said this earlier. I want to double down on it. What you're saying is because one guy, 5 guys, because a few people out of all the thousands of wealthy people in the country at the very top happen to say publicly that they're Republican, we all of a sudden have a problem with the oligarchy in this country.
It's the same thing that you often see. Democrats talk on and on and on about democracy, but if democracy gives them an answer they don't like, then it's anti-democratic. They talk about freedom, but if freedom produces things that they don't like, then they decided that freedom is in fact dictatorship. They talk about the responsibility of the big tech to censor us. They're literally angry that big tech is lessening its censorship and increasing its bipartisanship. And that is what makes it an oligarchy, not its control over the flow of information. Not the fact that I could go to Google right now and type in Chris Bedford article in the Federalist, here's the title, or article at the Blaze, and Google will try to bury the result because they don't want people to be able to find things even when they specifically look for it. They're not worried about the fact that they're trying to undermine the newspaper industry and literally replace it, destroying advertising, destroying mom and pop businesses. They're angry. They refuse to. They're stepping back on censorship. It's an incredible thing. I think Bill Buckley was the one who said that liberals love to talk about freedom of speech and freedom of thought, but they're amazed to find that anyone has any thoughts other than their own, and they're angry about it. Just like it's always been, just like it's really been exposed. This is about control.
We get one famous billionaire on our side, and everything starts changing out there on Capitol
Bezos
Hill.
buys a ticket to a show. I mean, he's not on the Republican side. He just paid $1 million. You get a nice ticket.
That's how it works. Hey, let's stay with Biden, but I want to transition over to the Gaza deal. Right? We had the ceasefire deal that came out yesterday. Biden's trying to go out there and take credit for it, but now the deal has hit a snag in the Israeli parliament. So give us the political ramifications of what you saw come down yesterday.
So the politics of this, and I think Netanyahu has nailed this, is not that Joe Biden didn't have a decent idea, just release the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. It's that there was no credibility. There was no willingness to back that up. Hamas knew, and Israel kind of knew, and everyone knew, that, well, Joe Biden wasn't willing to completely abandon Israel. He also wasn't going to give them whatever they wanted to. His party was way too fractured and way too divided on that. There was no credibility to these threats. What brought this deal forward, and we know this according to not just the timing, but what the prime minister of Israel has said, was Donald Trump. And Joe Biden tried to get out in front of this and say, this was my deal, this was my idea. Well, sure, it could be your idea, but everyone had the same idea. But it's the credibility and the threat of force that backs it up that makes actual negotiations and a long, drawn-out war possible. And this is just the latest symptom of something that really started under President Barack Obama. Well, Israel and America have always quietly played in each other's politics in a way that allies really aren't supposed to do, but they often do. Under Barack Obama, it became a lot more overt. Netanyahu, now the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history, is also an avowed conservative. And because of that, Barack Obama sent some of his advisors, gave them leave to go over there and to actually advise his opposition during his election to try and knock him out of power. And at that point, what had always been kind of just quiet influence operations in each other's countries became more and more and more overt. We saw Netanyahu basically on the side of Donald Trump in the 2020 election, and he was punished for that. Ben Rhodes came out, the Obama security advisor, and he started attacking AIPAC, the Israeli lobby in the United States, Israeli-American lobby, started openly attacking Netanyahu. Joe Biden didn't say it, but it was clear his Department of State didn't feel very warmly towards what they consider political opposition in Israel. And it's continued to this day. This is just the latest. And it's a relationship that ought to be repaired, because not only should countries not overtly dabble in each other's politics like that when they're allies, they shouldn't do it secretly either. And this whole thing needs to be reset.
Chris, let's go to Russ Vought. We talked a little bit about him yesterday. But we should really go back to that, having had all the hearings done from yesterday. Looking back, do a little retrospect, because we really need to hone in on this guy. This guy is someone who already had the job, right? Did a great job, and the Democrats are accusing him of giving really good and bureaucratic answers. So isn't that sort of a win? I mean, is he over the bar? Like there's nothing they can do about him?
This first round, he got over the bar because he's a consummate professional and he's smarter than most of the other people in that room, and he knows it. So he goes in there confidently. This is not his first round of hearings. He literally was confirmed for this position in the last presidency, and he did it very well. He was one of the top, most competent and effective lieutenants for Donald Trump's first administration, which was broadly much more chaotic than I think this one's going to be. That's why Democrats don't want him in there. But he's subject to more than one hearing, unfortunately for him. So while he cleared all the jumps on this one, he's going to have a little bit of a tough week next week. Congress is going to start to look into some of the plans that were discussed in Project 2025, which he was a player in and a seller of, which include not exactly spending all the money that Congress allocates for different things. Now, they're going to try and call that treasonous and something that's evil and something that usurps Congress. But to you and me, it would be saving money. And an example of this would be if Congress said, here's $10, go buy a tank, and he came back and said, I found the same tank for $8, saved $2. Well, they would say, well, you're not spending all the money. That's the way the government seems to work. He would look at that and say, well, we didn't have to. We got the same thing for the money, and I can return this to the Treasury. That's something Democrats hate. Actually, that's something that Congress hates. Remember, they impeached Donald Trump over this because they didn't think he was spending all the money that he ought to be in Ukraine and Russia. This is something that they take very seriously, and that's the next round of hearings that Russ Vought has. But he still is going to have, I think, an easier time than some of the other nominees.
Bedford, when we wake up tomorrow, what do we have to look forward to in the Beltway Brief?
Oh, I've got a great piece coming about how this week, even before Donald Trump has been in office, was a great victory for the president. And it starts off with Matt Gaetz and how Matt Gaetz made Pete Hegseth possible, and then how Pete Hegseth made victory after victory after victory possible. And now that they're entering a nomination day, not stumbling, but at a full sprint.
I look forward to that. And if you can, do something about the weather before we join you in D.C. over the weekend.
Absolutely
I see the
not.
Forecast. It's going to be quite chilly.
Here's what I'll do is I'll find us a pub with a fireplace for after inauguration.
We can work on that. We can work on that. Thanks so much, Bedford.
Open to that.